There's a moment, right after the intensity fades. The air grows still, the body softens, the heartbeat slows, and then an emptiness begins to rise. Quiet, hollow, almost unbearable. Many men feel it, but almost no one dares to speak of it. They roll away, reach for their phones, stare into nothing, pretending it's normal. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispers, something is missing. Because what should feel like connection often ends in distance. What should feel full suddenly feels empty. Why does pleasure so often leave behind a shadow? Why does intimacy sometimes awaken a loneliness that feels older than we are? Carl Jung asked these same questions over a century ago, and what he discovered shocked him. For Jung, that emptiness wasn't weakness or guilt. It was spiritual decay, a sign that something in the psyche had split apart. He realized that sex, at its core, was never just about the body. It was the unconscious reaching out, searching for wholeness. But to understand what he truly meant, we must go back to the quiet corridors of his clinic in Zurich, where one young man's confession would forever change how Jung saw love, desire, and the haunting silence that follows.
The year was 1912. Inside Jung's quiet Zurich clinic, a young man sat before him, nervous, pale, and visibly burdened. His hands wouldn't stop trembling as he spoke, his words barely holding together under the weight of his shame. He confessed to Jung that he felt trapped in a strange cycle. After every moment of passion, he was left not with satisfaction, but with a hollow ache he couldn't name. He said it felt as if a part of his soul vanished the moment the pleasure faded. "I don't understand," he whispered. "In those moments, I feel alive, but afterward, it's like something inside me dies." Jung didn't see a sinner or a broken man. He saw a divided psyche. He listened quietly, realizing the man's torment wasn't about morality, it was about meaning. The emptiness was not physical, but symbolic. Jung later wrote, "Every psychic process is an image and an energy." This man's energy, his libido, was not flowing toward genuine connection, but toward possession. The act itself was not love, it was an unconscious attempt to reclaim a lost part of himself. Jung began to see a pattern. Desire was not merely biological, it was psychological, even spiritual. Behind the man's longing was something far deeper, the hidden urge of the unconscious to unite what had been split apart. What looked like lust was in truth a cry for wholeness, and in that dimly lit office, Jung understood that when we seek another person without first knowing ourselves, pleasure can turn into pain, and intimacy can awaken the deepest loneliness within.
Jung believed that within every man lives an inner feminine presence, a mysterious and emotional force he called the Anima. She is the embodiment of his soul's sensitivity, intuition, and depth. When a man is unaware of this inner figure, he begins to project her outward onto women, chasing in others what he has not yet found within himself. The result is a dangerous illusion, a false sense of union that never lasts. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation can only happen when both are whole within themselves. When a man's unconscious tries to find completion through another person, the encounter becomes an attempt to possess, not to connect. And once the physical moment ends, the illusion collapses, leaving behind the familiar echo of emptiness." This was Jung's shocking realization. Most men do not fall in love with a woman. They fall in love with their own projection of the Anima. What they truly desire is not her, but the missing emotional life she represents. When the fantasy fades, they are forced to confront the truth that no external lover can fulfill what the psyche has disowned. Modern psychology confirms this ancient truth. Research shows that emotionally detached intimacy often leads to a sense of alienation and loneliness. The body may feel fulfilled, but the spirit remains starved. Jung understood that until a man faces his inner feminine, the act of love will always be incomplete. The real union he seeks cannot be found in another's body. It begins in the hidden chambers of his own soul.
This feeling of emptiness after desire is not a modern problem, it is an ancient one. Across time and cultures, men have spoken of the strange void that follows pleasure, a silence that lingers after passion fades. Ancient Greeks called it the sorrow of Eros, the pain that follows love's intoxication. Philosophers and poets all described the same haunting truth. The human heart, once inflamed, inevitably returns to the chill of solitude. In Greek mythology, Narcissus gazed into the water and fell in love with his own reflection. He thought he was reaching for another, but he was only embracing an image of himself. Jung saw in this myth a perfect metaphor for modern man, constantly projecting his unlived emotions onto others, mistaking reflection for connection. The more he chased his ideal, the further he drifted from his true self. Jung wrote that this repeated projection creates a psychic hunger, what he called psychic vampirism. It is the unconscious attempt to feed on another's energy to fill an internal void. But this hunger can never be satisfied externally. Each attempt only deepens the emptiness because the source of the longing lies within. Throughout history, spiritual traditions have warned of this same cycle, the endless pursuit of satisfaction outside the self. Jung understood that the void after pleasure was not a curse, but a signal. It revealed the soul's desire to return to itself. Until that reunion happens, even the most passionate love will fade into silence, leaving behind the same eternal echo, the ache of separation from one's own inner world.
In today's world, Jung's warning about the projection of the Anima has taken on a new and even more dangerous form. Men are surrounded by endless stimulation, images, videos, and social media profiles that promise intimacy, connection, and desire. Each swipe and scroll offers the illusion of closeness, a chance to project longing onto someone who doesn't even exist. Yet, behind every digital interaction lies the same emptiness Jung observed over a century ago. Men chase what they believe will satisfy them, but the satisfaction is fleeting. The body may respond, desire may spike, but the soul remains untouched. The digital world has amplified the unconscious tendency to seek the anima outside oneself, offering endless projections to feed a hunger that can never be filled. Jung wrote, "Man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. But screens, distractions, and superficial encounters make consciousness difficult. The modern anima is everywhere, appearing in perfectly curated images, in the promise of instant connection, in fantasies tailored to desire. And yet, each encounter ends the same way, with emptiness, a silent reminder that the inner feminine has not yet been recognized or embraced. Real intimacy cannot be downloaded, swiped, or streamed. It must be discovered within. Until men turn inward and face the parts of themselves they have ignored, desire will continue to echo through hollow moments. The body may seek connection, but the soul will still ache. Jung's ancient lesson has never been more relevant. Fulfillment is not found in another person or in a digital fantasy. It begins within the hidden chambers of one's own psyche.
When we examine the patterns of emptiness after intimacy, three types begin to emerge, each revealing a different way the psyche fails to connect with itself. The first is the hunter. He is driven by conquest and validation, seeing intimacy as a goal to be achieved rather than a shared experience. Every encounter is a performance, every partner a prize. Once the act ends, the thrill evaporates, leaving only the hollow echo of achievement without meaning. His emptiness is loud, sharp, and immediate. The second is the dreamer. He romanticizes every encounter, projecting his ideals onto real people. He falls in love with fantasy, not reality. Every partner becomes a canvas on which he paints his desires, hopes, and longings. When reality inevitably fails to match the fantasy, he is left with a profound sense of disappointment and disconnection. The dreamer's emptiness is melancholic, a quiet sadness that lingers long after the body has moved on. The third is the numb one. He uses intimacy to escape pain, to anesthetize feelings that he cannot face. Sex becomes a temporary distraction from inner turmoil, a brief relief that never addresses the source of the suffering. Each encounter deepens the void instead of filling it, leaving him increasingly disconnected from both others and himself. Jung saw that all three patterns share a common root: the failure to integrate the anima, the unconscious feminine within. Until men face this inner presence, their desire will always be incomplete, their moments of intimacy shadowed by emptiness, and the search for fulfillment will continue outside themselves rather than within.
The path out of this emptiness begins with what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming fully aware of oneself, both conscious and unconscious. For men, this journey requires turning inward and confronting the parts of the psyche that have been ignored or suppressed. It is here, in the quiet and often uncomfortable moments of self-reflection, that the inner feminine, the anima, can finally be recognized and embraced. Jung emphasized that integration is not a single act, but a lifelong process. It begins with awareness, noticing the projections placed onto others, understanding the desires that are not truly about the external world, and listening to the inner voice that has been ignored for too long. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This means facing vulnerability, acknowledging emotional depth, and embracing intuition as a guide rather than resisting it as weakness. As a man integrates his anima, he learns to meet desire with consciousness instead of projection. The body is no longer used to escape emptiness, nor is intimacy a transaction. Instead, connection becomes an expression of wholeness. Pleasure is no longer fleeting. It is a reflection of an internal alignment between the masculine and feminine aspects of the psyche. The emptiness that once followed intimacy transforms into energy, creativity, and presence. Jung observed that men who achieve this integration experience a depth of connection that is rare and enduring. They no longer seek fulfillment entirely outside themselves because they have found it within. Real intimacy, he concluded, is born not from another person, but from the conscious union of one's own soul.
The difference between failed and successful integration becomes strikingly clear when we look at how men, experience intimacy. The unintegrated man approaches connection as a transaction. He seeks validation, novelty, or escape, using others to fill the gaps within himself. Each encounter offers a brief spike of pleasure, but afterward, the emptiness returns, stronger than before. The act drains him rather than nourishes him, because his energy is projected outward instead of circulating within. He mistakes desire for fulfillment, illusion for reality, and the cycle continues endlessly. In contrast, the integrated man experiences intimacy as expansion rather than depletion. He has confronted the parts of himself he once ignored, recognized the inner feminine, and embraced vulnerability. Desire is no longer a chase, but a meeting. He brings presence, awareness, and emotional honesty into every encounter. His connection with another person becomes a reflection of his own wholeness, not a substitute for it. Pleasure strengthens rather than empties, because it is aligned with the psyche rather than fleeing from it. Jung observed that this distinction is crucial. Without integration, intimacy is fleeting, superficial, and ultimately unfulfilling. With integration, it becomes a source of energy, creativity, and deep emotional resonance. The difference is not simply about sex. It is about consciousness, self-awareness, and the ability to meet both oneself and another fully. True fulfillment, Jung believed, emerges only when a man reconciles with his inner anima, transforming the emptiness that once followed desire into a profound sense of presence and wholeness.
If you have ever felt that hollow silence after intimacy, know this: it does not mean something is wrong with you. That emptiness is a signal, a message from your unconscious that a part of you has been ignored, a piece of your own soul left unrecognized. Jung saw it not as punishment, but as a call, a whisper from the depths of the psyche, urging men to look inward, to confront what they have long avoided. The transformation begins when a man stops seeking completion outside himself and starts discovering it within. It is in the quiet moments of reflection, in dreams, in art, and in intuition that the inner feminine, the Anima, finally emerges. She guides him toward emotional honesty, depth, and true presence. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For men, this means embracing vulnerability as strength, feeling rather than fleeing, and allowing the soul to speak through desire rather than being lost to it. When this integration occurs, intimacy changes entirely. The emptiness that once followed pleasure transforms into energy, creativity, and a profound sense of wholeness. Connection no longer drains, it nourishes. Desire becomes a mirror of the inner life, and love transforms from a fleeting encounter into a meaningful exchange between two conscious souls. If you recognize yourself in this journey, know that the void is not the end, it is the beginning. It is the door to self-awareness, wholeness, and a love that is both deep and enduring. Jung's insight reminds us that true transformation starts within, and only by meeting ourselves fully can we experience intimacy that fills rather than empties. If you recognize yourself in this description, if you've ever wondered why the moments that should feel most alive sometimes feel the most lonely, know this: you're not broken. You're waking up. What if emptiness isn't the end of desire, but the beginning of self-understanding? Tell me in the comments, do you think modern relationships are suffering from the loss of inner connection? Subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of the soul. And in the next video, we'll explore the dark side of feminine energy, what Jung warned men never to ignore.